the presentations were extremely rich, and they were pretty optimistic despite some dark side in the topic that we're discussing today. Professor Hampson mentioned some of the creative ways of rethinking funding for refugee protection, such as repurposing frozen assets, the International Corruption Court to address the issue of bad governance. And Mrs. Zahid as well mentioned the efforts of the Parliament in terms of enhancing Canada's refugee program, sponsorship program, resettlement program, and also the work of the Immigration and Refugee Board. So it was really great to hear. And Bernard, you mentioned the way forward in terms of monitoring and adopting a effective whole of society approach. I think we have a lot of food for thought for our PROTECT research project. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions and comments.
I want to ask my question, Fan Hampson, and I want to ask you about connection between a problem of refugees and migrants in 20 last years to international policy of Western governments. And firstly, I think about connection between the problem of refugees to involving of Western governments in former Yugoslavia, Iraq of Saddam Hussein, Libya of Muammar al-Gaddafi, civilian war in Syria of Assad, and other very lot examples of Western involvement, negative Western involvement in different states around the world that, according to my opinion, was supported to creation of all this problem, of this movement of refugees from different states to other states. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, that is a very interesting question about accountability and the responsibility of Western governments when they intervene in societies to promote regime change and the consequences of their action contributes to the breakdown of not only the governance institutions that were in place in a country, but the ensuing chaos leads people to flee their country. And I think the two clearest illustrations of that are Libya, where the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, which was undertaken for supposedly human rights, humanitarian purposes, has led to continuing chaos in that country. I don't think one can put intervention at the root of the problems in Syria, but certainly the problems that we've seen continuing in Iraq, including internal displacement issues as a result of the downfall of the regime there. There's no question, I think, that I think we can probably agree some of those interventions were ill-advised. If we had to replay history again, we wouldn't want to see it played in that fashion. I think the clearest example today of the responsibility that comes when you intervene in a society. If you're going to break it, you do have a responsibility to make sure that the pieces are in place before you decide to exit. And the chaotic quality, and that's putting it diplomatically, of the US withdrawal in Afghanistan, no question, that has contributed to the chaos we're seeing in both within that country and outside the country. But I think it's also fair to say that the Afghan government at the time, and it's the failure of that government in terms of massive problems that we all know of corruption and so forth, that contributed to the undermining of the legitimacy of that regime. That's also been a factor in the ensuing chaos in that country. But yes, there is a responsibility, and if you break it, you own it, and you have a responsibility to put the pieces back together. And that may be a deep contributing cause, if we want to put it in those terms. And there is a responsibility that comes there. I really don't disagree with the thrust of that question.
Thank you. We have a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your informative and very supportive information. I'm a Syrian refugee, a doctoral student. My question to Dr. Hampson, and you mentioned that you listed Syria as one of the countries that carry the burden of refugees. And at the same time, we know within the last 3 years, we know Syria was the main source of refugees, leading the globe in the refugee as a source of refugee. And you know that there are some reports that the Assad regime used some funds from international organizations and supporting his human rights violation and bombing and killing civilians in Syria. So my question to you, how the idea of like listing Syria as one of the the countries that carry the burden, and Syria as one of the leading countries of refugees, and later you talk about Magnitsky legislation or proposal. Thank you so much.
We can take another question. I see the hand.
Thank you very much. I'm a researcher on forced migration, and I'm from Nigeria. My question is on the rights, and given the nature of forced migrants, their movements, their mobility is actually irregular, and I want to really know what is put in place, or the policies that are put in place to ensure that forced migrants and refugees have access to COVID-19 testing, vaccination, and of course, treatment. Thank you.
See, Canada has been a global leader in refugee resettlement, and also in regards to providing foreign aid and humanitarian aid across the world. So in regards to COVID-19 also, Canada has contributed significantly to COVAX, and through COVAX, the access to vaccination is being made to the countries in need. So, and Canada will continue to, right from the beginning, Canada contributed to the COVAX fund, and vaccines are being directed, and wherever they are needed, the vaccines will be diverted from the COVAX to the countries in need.
Just on the first question about Syria diverting funds from NGOs who are working in the country, I think that that's a problem in many settings. That there is, for lack of a better word, extortion on the part of public authorities. I think there's some real concern as we look now to the situation in Afghanistan, where there are many NGOs that are operating, that the Taliban government, which is short of money, may put the squeeze on those NGOs who are really there to help the Afghan people. And I'm not I think to come back to something that both Bernard and Salma talked about, making, when we have good evidence, making that public, shining the spotlight on these regimes. It's got to be done, and we got to hold them to account, because they're these governments want other things from us, and that's certainly true in the case of the Taliban government. It's true, for that matter, of the Assad government, which is looking for a way to re-legitimize itself internationally, and it just ain't going to happen until they clean up their act. So we do have sources of leverage. The idea of repurposing frozen assets, where that the leadership of a regime, the elites, and Assad in Syria is a very good example of that. His family does have hundreds of millions of pounds sitting frozen in bank accounts in London, in Switzerland. They actually have the family name on that account. It's not hidden. There have been active discussions in the United Kingdom by various members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle there to repurpose those assets to help the victims of the transgressions of the regime, and the monies to help refugees, potentially in Turkey, which is bearing the brunt of the burden. There are millions, literally millions, of Syrians who've fled to Turkey. The challenge always is, if you put in a place to both seize the assets, or a system to seize the assets, and you can do that through a court-ordered process. The FARA legislation that the senators put forward does that in a Canadian context. So these kinds of initiatives do have to be tailored to the local laws and customs of a country, but you can do it, and and those funds could be repurposed to very legitimate international agencies that are trying to help these people. So there is a way to disperse them in a way that's fair and equitable. And again, I think this is somewhere where Canada can really take the lead. Switzerland, as some of you may know, does have an administrative law in the books where they're taking bad money and repurposing it, and they've actually confiscated funds of dictators and repurposed it. But their legislation is directed towards humanitarian projects in the country of origin, And that works well if there's been regime change in the country of origin. But when there hasn't been regime change, as we see in the case of Syria, then you need more creative ways to use that money to help the victims of what are truly egregious human rights abuses, and arguably the most vulnerable are those people who've been rendered stateless. No question about it.
Thank you. Now, would you like to jump in?
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you. Also to mention that Canada is leading also an international initiative of collecting evidence against the Assad regime, and it's funded by the Minister of Justice. So hopefully we have tons of evidence, but still, as Professor Hampson said, logistics are very complicated always. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Salma?
Yes, just to complete what was said before, I think the Syrian crisis, which has been ongoing for too many years, and we cannot simply accept a normalization of this situation as unfortunately so many are denouncing. But I think it's important that each international institution continues to put the pressure in their respective fields of work. In our time at the working group, we had followed up on the report of the Commission, the International Commission of Inquiry, which documented the atrocities in the Syrian conflict. And we also wrote to the General Assembly asking for the Assembly to ask the Security Council to make a referral to the International Criminal Court in this respect. As Adnan was saying, there are lots of initiatives that seek to document human rights violations and crimes that are occurring right now, so that one day they can be prosecuted properly. Families of the disappeared have also asked for not only for justice, but also for truth, and have been pressuring the international community so that those who disappeared in the conflict are located and identified and so forth. So there's a big initiative led by families of the disappeared called the Charter for Truth and Justice, which seeks to do that. We actually pushed for this initiative when we briefed the Security Council in March earlier this year, and invited the Security Council and other relevant stakeholders to create an institution which would, similar to that, that seeks to document the crimes, an institution that will ensure that the disappeared are located, which means looking into prisons, both led by state entities as well as detention centers, clandestine and so forth, led by non-state actors as well, and also look at mass graves, which are unfortunately everywhere and need to be the object of serious scientific, forensic investigations, so that everybody can be accounted for, and that the families can know what has happened to their loved ones, where they are, what has happened to them, and can also, have closure with all their cultural and religious desires. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard. We have one more question.
Okay, I will directly ask my question. Thank you for this opportunity. what do you think about the role of social entrepreneurship on the refugee protection in Canada or in the global scale as an actor for global governance process? Thank you.
As I indicated in my remarks, I think this private sponsorship of the refugees is something really which we can learn a lot of lessons for. And it was really very successful in Canada when we welcomed the Syrian refugees. Over close to more than 20,000 refugees came through that program, where different entrepreneurs, different not-for-profit organizations, church groups, mosque groups came together to provide support and make sure that they sponsor people. So I think this is a model, because all those refugees cannot be resettled through the government-assisted programs. So definitely this is something which can help. And in those, I think more entrepreneurs can come in and play their role to support the migrants and resettle them in respective countries. But of course, resettlement is not an answer for all the migrants. And I think it is really very important that we look into the economic drivers as well as the climate actions which are happening, which is driving migrants.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining this webinar.